Vai, bellissimo, sei live. Siete tutti live.
Ok, ciao a tutti e benvenuti al talk del RomaJS del 17 aprile. Ta-da! Ringraziamo ancora Guido per l'ottima animazione. Intanto, cos'è RomaJS? È prima di tutto una community di appassionati del mondo tech. Come il nome suggerisce, chiaramente gravitiamo abbastanza sul mondo JavaScript, ma non ci focalizziamo solo su questo, siamo abbastanza aperti a altre tecnologie e a vari discorsi. Ci incontriamo ogni terzo mercoledì del mese, appuntamento in presenza, quindi online e anche in presenza. Ci trovate le dirette su YouTube. È una community aperta a tutti, non ci sono particolari barriere né requisiti né cabale che bisogna seguire. Chiaramente l'obiettivo, siamo qui per condividere la nostra passione per il mondo tech. Un'ultima cosa, ci trovate online, ora siamo in diretta chiaramente su YouTube, da chi segue la diretta, e chiaramente tutte le dirette, tutti i VOD delle dirette sono poi disponibili sul canale YouTube di RomaJS. Siamo su diversi social, Discord, GitHub, YouTube, eccetera, eccetera, X o Twitter, a seconda se siete nostalgici. Come raggiungerci? Tutti i link per unirsi ai nostri social li trovate sul sito RomaJS, quel gran gigantesco QR code anche. Ringraziamo Sourcesense che ci ospita oggi. Grazie. L'evento di oggi. Oggi faremo un talk in cui discuteremo degli sprechi dello sviluppo software. In particolare Luís Rodrigues, qui accanto a me, farà un talk in lingua inglese in cui ci presenterà queste problematiche e come ovviarle. Iniziamo.
Grazie, io ho già un microfono.
A posto.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Grazie. Grazie RomaJS, grazie ancora Sourcesense. Io mi sono accorto, stavo parlando un po' prima, che è stato quasi esattamente un anno fa la prima volta che sono venuto qua. Quindi vi ringrazio per l'accoglienza anche. Okay, I'll switch to English because it will make the talk go a little smoother than if I did it in Italian. And I'm going to share now my slides. Okay, so this is not about, I'm contractually obliged to talk about JavaScript at least once in the talk. So I'll use the word JavaScript to say this has nothing to do with JavaScript. If you do JavaScript, you can apply these practices, I guess, if you want to. So I care a lot about waste in my teams, in the work that I do day to day. So this is an extension of what I keep repeating over and over every day to my team and to teams that I work with at Newstar. I'm a staff engineer there. Part of my work is coding, obviously, and dealing with technology, but also helping teams along, adopt better practices, and be a little more aware of where wasteful practices they're doing and how to circumvent them and become more effective teams and more performant teams and happier teams as well. Before we go into software engineering or product engineering, as I like to call it, a little aside or a little very brief introduction about lean manufacturing, because lean manufacturing is where the concept of waste comes from, and the wastes that I'm going to talk about come from. This comes from the Toyota production system. So it says here 1950s, but it actually began a long time before this. They've begun adopting a certain types of philosophies and principles that they apply to manufacturing. This is not to make cars, but actually to make clothing and textiles, because that's how Toyota started in the 1920s. They had these huge automated or semi-automated looms that would produce fabric. So a lot of this stuff comes from here. For example, the concept of automation, which is not about automating production, but automating quality control. And they had this in the 1920s, these huge looms that would make the fabric. They would stop if they detected a problem. If, for example, a thread snapped or something like that. And it would force people to go and check the machine or the thing that was being produced. And if you think about it, it's a lot like a deployment pipeline. If the deployment pipeline breaks, it forces everyone to go check what's going wrong, like automated tests and so on. So there are a lot of parallels between lean manufacturing as it used to be in the 1920s, 1950s, etc., and product engineering today. The Toyota production system has these principles: respect for people, so they don't want to push people too far, overwork them, and as we'll see, this also leads to waste, overworking people or forcing them to context switch all the time. It not only makes people unhappy, it also contributes to making worse products. So it's important to control this waste. Continuous improvement. So if you work in an agile way, you'll have these retrospectives, for example, where you reflect on the past and you try to improve the way you work. So a lot of these things have some parallels with how a lot of things we do are set up. Specifically, I'm going to talk about waste. So there's a lot of other stuff. I'm going to focus specifically on this. There's 7 types of waste. There's an 8th one that was added later on by American managers and scholars of management. But the 7 main types of waste are transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, and then skills, which was the one that was added later. I'll go over each one of them and then try to map them out to product engineering, software engineering, with some tips about how you can go around this type of waste. Before we do this, there's a note about necessary waste. So just the fact that waste exists doesn't mean it's bad. Suppose that you have a company that produces luxury items. So you want to produce some, I don't know, golden toilet paper. Obviously, you're doing too much. But if that's your market, like if your market is, I don't know, Donald Trump or something like that, like you want to produce golden toilet paper and sell it to people. So it's important to also be a little critical about what is waste that you want to have and waste that you don't. So applying this to product engineering, this is an incomplete list. There's lots of ways that you can think about. If you have any ideas that I don't know, free to let me know, and we can talk about them a bit. And also, a lot of the recommendations that I make, this is how my teams work. So I'm not saying you have to work like this. Like, you work however you want to work. This is how we work or try to work. We're not perfect. We try to get to this ideal way of working where we try to minimize waste and try to make things as efficient and as pleasant to work with as possible. So first one is transport. Transport is, in the lean manufacturing world, anything that requires you moving one thing from one place to another, whether it's raw materials, whether it's the finished goods, it's all transport. How does this map to software engineering? So transport carries a cost. Obviously, you have to move stuff, but it also contributes to damaging the items while they're in transit. So if you're shipping something somewhere else, it could get lost, it could get damaged. Obviously, things are not very likely to get damaged when you transfer them in our world, but it can still happen. So a deployment is transfer. You're moving code from your machine to production, and you can't just say, well, it worked on my machine, it doesn't work on production anymore. That's a damage of transfer, right? So handoffs, for example, it's knowledge transfer. This should be minimized whenever possible. So any transfer that you have of knowledge between, for example, UX and engineers, it's very common. Someone gives you a Figma file to implement without any explanation. You go, you take it, you do something, and it's not right. There's something lost in translation, right? This back and forth, where knowledge is deteriorated as it moves between people, is something that contributes to waste. It contributes to making a product that's worse. It wastes your time. It wastes effort. Same thing for testers, for example. You send something over for testing with no context. Someone tests it, they send it back, they say it's a bug. Turns out it's not a bug. That's the way it's supposed to work, and so on and so forth. So handoffs is a problem. The way we mitigate this is that we pair a lot. We do pair programming, not just pair programming, pair everything. We try to pair with UX designers. We pair with product managers. We join calls with customers, for example. I think there's some, I'll just show them all. We try to minimize the number of intermediaries between any knowledge transfer. So if there's a customer call, we just join it. As engineers, we hear directly from the customers what their problems are, rather than some manager telling us what they think the customer needs. Again, deployments, I mentioned the stuff. Having manual deployments is a point of failure. It's not automated. One person could deploy something one way, another person could deploy something a different way. It could break. So having a deployment pipeline is always good. There is a cost with having remote work. So now that in the post-pandemic world, a lot of people work remotely. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does carry a cost. So we have to be very mindful. And my company, we work remotely. I mean, I'm here. Most of my colleagues are in Berlin. A lot of others are in Lisbon. Others are in Boston. So we have to make it work. And fortunately, we have the technology to help us. We have video calls, obviously. We have screen sharing tools. So we are able to do pair programming. We are able to work on something at the same time. And the knowledge transfer is very smooth when that happens. So we simply by working together and understanding and talking about the thing we're working on, all the misunderstandings, they just melt away. Pull requests is a popular one. A lot of people love pull requests. We don't do pull requests because we pair. Pair contains the pull requests. So pull requests are really useful in a low trust environment where, like the open source world, for example. But because we are pair programming, we are looking at the same code at the same time, discussing things, revising the architecture, and so on. When it comes to deploying this to production, we really need a code review. We already had at least 2 people, sometimes more. We have 3 people on the same call looking at the same code, contributing to it. So if we have 2, 3 people, we don't need to do a pull request. We just push this to master. And it gets deployed because we have automated deployments going directly from the master branch to production. Oh, getting crazy here. And we also try to always finish what we start, because if you leave something interrupted, that's an invitation to have to hand over something, sometimes handing over even to ourselves. if we don't finish what we started, when we pick it up again, 1 week from now, 1 month from now, are we going to remember exactly where we were? Are we going to remember what we still need to do to get it right? So we try to finish always with the start. Inventory. So in the manufacturing world, this is all the inventory you keep in the warehouse somewhere. All the raw materials, or even also the finished products and the stuff that you have that you're still building. It's not good to keep a lot of inventory in the manufacturing world, because sometimes things decay. Like if you're producing food, for example, some kind of food, keeping all the food in a warehouse, whether it's the raw materials or if it's already done, 6 months from now, it's garbage, right? Even a lot of things, even if they aren't food, they could just go out of fashion, or they could become unmarketable in the meantime. So keeping a lot of stuff is not good. Again, I'll show everything. So same thing with development. Any unused features that you're waiting to release because someone's not comfortable that they're finished, just release them. Release them behind a feature flag if you have to, if you don't want to expose them to a big audience, but release them, because keeping them behind some, I don't know, a pull request or something like that, it's just going to contribute to you releasing a bunch of stuff that hasn't been tested or validated by customers. There's a much bigger risk when you do this. But if you release something, even if it's rough, we do this a lot with customers. We don't release our features immediately to everyone, but we select a few people who are willing to try out the new stuff. And we have calls with them, and we give them the context, and we say, this is experimental. This might not even end up in the final product, but you've agreed to do this with us, and we'll turn on the feature flag, and you'll be able to use it. You'll be able to give feedback on, does this make you happy? Does this help you or not, right? And be aware, the design is rough. It's going to be ugly. We're going to break stuff from time to time. But this gives us a lot of very useful feedback as we're developing. And we're not keeping stuff, hidden away. Again, unfinished work, same thing as before. Like anything that you leave half done on the finished product that then doesn't work correctly, that's not good. Over provisioning is a classic. Part of the reason why over provisioning happens is that a lot of teams, and this has been my experience in pretty much every company that I've been in, teams don't measure their stuff. So they just assume that they're going to need, I don't know, an X3 large, whatever thing on Amazon, because people don't have a very good perception of what kind of resources are actually needed by the application. So they just are conservative, and they provision something that's more than what's needed. I remember having discussions with people saying, no, you should switch to this database because it allows 8 billion requests a second. And we're like, our load is like 50 requests a second. Why would I need that kind of power? Like, why would I need to switch to a database that gives me 8 million requests a second if all I need is 50, at least now? But even in the future, will I need even 1,000 per second? Maybe not. So there's a lot of waste trying to do too much, and it's very tempting for someone, especially engineers, especially technical people, to get carried away. And there's this shiny new tech that promises supersonic speeds of anything that's sometimes not even needed anywhere. Backlog is an interesting one as well. It's very common for the teams that I've worked with to have this huge backlog. They just dump stuff in there. Like some manager has an idea. Oh, we should do this feature. Okay, let's create a ticket, put it in there. Nobody picks up that ticket, ever. Like, so one of the things that we do every now and then, we have these 50 items in our backlog. Do we expect to do any of this in the next month, in the next 3 months even? If we don't, we just delete them. Like, have we done them in the last 3 months? Are we going to do them in the next 3 months? Are we ever going to do them? A lot of people are a little afraid because, oh, someone had this great idea, but ideas are cheap, first of all, and second, I like what the people at 37 Signals say about this, is that good ideas always come back. So we shouldn't be afraid of losing them. If we drop a ticket that has a good idea, if it is really a good idea, it will come back. Someone is going to ask for it. Someone is going to think, oh, it would be really cool if we did this. And if it was a really great idea, it would have been done already, probably, right? So sometimes we're too attached to the potential of things or the idea of things, and we keep these huge backlogs. The problem with the huge backlogs is that if you're prioritizing this stuff, if you have to spend time discussing, are we going to do this now? And you have to do it for 50, 100, 200 items in the backlog. You're going to waste a lot of time talking about stuff that you'll never, ever be able to do. Even if you want to do it, you won't be able to do it. So we cut it short. Like, right now in the team, in the main team that I'm working with, we have like 20 items. And even that is too much. Non-production infra. This is something that I keep dreaming of doing. I haven't done it yet. Testing environments, staging environments. No, the only environment that matters is production. But people aren't comfortable with that. So we have to maintain this clone of production around with fake data and fake everything. But anyway, yeah. One day I'll do a talk if I ever do that, if I ever manage to do that. And keeping stuff around just because, even with code, people love to keep code and data around. It might be useful one day. No, just delete it. Motion. So anything that has to do with the movement of people or equipment as well. So people, especially in the manufacturing world, people move around. They can get injured, or stuff can get lost or delayed. Obviously, it's very unlikely that people will get injured in our industry, but there's still some stuff. So multitasking is a form of motion. You're moving between tasks, and that wears you down. That contributes to you being dissatisfied at work. It contributes to not paying attention to things as they should. So we try to enforce very strict work in progress limits on the team. Currently, so we have 6-7 people on the team, and we have a very strict. If you use Kanban, if you don't use Kanban, maybe it's appropriate if I explain. So we have these items in the to-do list, and they move to another group or column that's the work in progress, or the things that we're currently working on. And we have a limit on those. So even though we have 7 people on the team is not allowed, unless there's a pretty good reason, to work on more than 3 things at a time. And if you want to work on more than 3 things, you have to finish the things that are in progress. And we force them or we force ourselves to work this way. This gives us a lot of focus, and it seems a little counterintuitive, but having a strict work in progress limit actually makes things move faster. It improves the flow of work that is done. What else? Unnecessary meetings, of course. It's a huge drain. People running meetings just to talk about things that could have been, a Slack message or an email. Anything that has to do with poor tooling, if it's something that's really inconvenient that you have to do manual work around. Any manual work, actually, if you have to test manually, it's wasted effort. Just automate the tests if you can. And again, the deployments as well. Reinventing the wheel. I had this problem at this current company, but also before. It's very common that something already exists, but people think, no, I'm going to build my own because I'm an engineer, right? But our job is not, and this is why I call what I do product engineering and not software engineering, because my job is to build a product. It's not to build software on its own. So if it doesn't contribute to making a product, it's probably waste. So reinventing the wheel is, it can lead to a lot of wasted effort, to a lot of, it looks great on the CV, but it's not ideal. You're wasting the company's time, and you're wasting your time building some custom stuff that you could already get from GitHub or from someplace else. This should be familiar to everyone. Waiting for something to finish, waiting on another team, that's a classic. Pull request is also a form of waiting. So when we, like I said, when we work with pair programming, we just push stuff to master. It gets deployed automatically to production. There's no wait. I mean, there's a wait for the deployment pipeline and the tests to run, but if that takes a few minutes, that's not a big deal. But if you have to wait a day for a code review or hours, no, we don't want to wait for that, because it leads to context switching again. Like, there's distractions. You send something to be reviewed, you wait hours, someone reviews it, you go check it, you have to make some changes. In the meantime, you've probably already started something else because you don't want to wait, right? You want to feel like you're being useful. So this back and forth between going to the code review and going back to the test that you were doing, it's waste. Requirements, waiting for requirements is also, unfortunately, very common. And the way we have addressed this is we have a product manager that's in the team, and we have designers that are in the team, or a designer that's in the team. And the team is fully autonomous to decide what to build. So we're not waiting for orders from outside. We do talk with customers. The orders come from the customers, or rather, the needs come from the customers. But we decide what to build, and we decide when to build it, and what kind of priority we're going to give to what we're building. And this gives us a lot of power. It really empowers the team itself to work and not wait for someone else to tell us what to do. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a little bit. The frequent releases you do, I mentioned a while back that we try to release this stuff, even if it's unfinished, even if it's experimental, to customers as soon as possible. The great thing about this is there's no waiting. We don't wait for feedback. We don't wait until the feature is completely perfect and perfectly built and released and adopted by everyone before we start to get feedback from the customers. We try to recruit a few people to test our stuff before it's released publicly. And we get early feedback, which is really useful because we're not even building the wrong thing. Again, I'll talk about this in a little while. We're not building the wrong thing, so we're always course correcting with the feedback that we're given. And you've probably noticed by now that a lot of these things are self-reinforcing. So the things that we do to eliminate or to mitigate some of the waste are actually useful to mitigate other types of waste that exist. Overproduction is producing more than what we need. And here, feedback from customers is also very important because we don't build more than what's needed to solve or address the customer's needs. Because we're always talking with them, this early feedback is really useful. Because if we are waiting to release something with no feedback, we don't know if we are building more than the things that we need, right? So it's very useful for them to say, hey, we're happy with what you've done. And this is a signal for us to go, okay, we don't need to do any more. I mean, we need to clean it up, make it a little bit prettier, but we don't need to build features that we've probably thought about and very likely everyone thinks about when they're building a product, but they're actually not needed by anyone. Context switching, and again, you're limiting the work in progress to make sure that you're not working on too many things at the same time. Properly prioritizing customer feedback is super important, again, to understand what's actually needed. And anything that you build, really, that's not contributing to the product. So if you're deciding to build something from scratch, if you build something just in case it might be useful, no. If you build prototypes, or especially with designers love to do this super pretty Figma prototypes. And, you know, maybe don't spend so much time on this because we're not selling the prototypes to the customers. The customers buy the app or whatever, or the platform or whatever we're selling. They don't buy the prototypes. The prototypes are useful to convey an idea, to communicate where or to be. But if we pair together, if we have engineers and designers sitting together, talking with each other, actually talking with each other, showing the designs if necessary to give each other an idea of what's correct, then we don't need to go overboard with building artifacts that nobody uses. Same thing with documentation. Writing documentation that nobody reads, it's overproduction. Overprocessing, it's very related to overproduction in our industry. Normally, overprocessing has to do with making something better or more polished than it needs to be. So we call it gold plating sometimes in software, because you don't need to gold plate something unless you're selling stuff that's gold plated, like I mentioned. So limiting the level of polish that you need to do to deliver something. If something solves the customer's problem, it doesn't have to be pixel perfect. Like if there is a tiny little problem in the application, you're not going to say, we cannot release this because it's not perfect. It's not how I've seen in the Figma prototype somewhere. Just to release it, fix it later if you have to, but no, just to release it. Over-engineering, obviously, it's the number one problem that I have to deal with. Again, it's the same old thing about, you know, people building more than they need to build. The generic code, let's build a framework for this single application that we're writing that we don't need to reuse ever again. These shared libraries that only a single service uses, that kind of thing. Scope creep is also a favorite, you know, especially if people who write requirements. They say, oh, it would be nice to have this and this and this and this, and we cannot release until all of these things are done, which is why we talk with customers and not some stakeholder or some manager who's translating these requirements to the team. Because getting this feedback directly from the customers, and I insist on this a lot, that we talk with customers. It allows us to have a much better view of what's actually needed by the customer. Having metrics is great too, and So like I said, observability isn't the strong suit of a lot of software teams that I've worked with. But it's great once you start to leverage it for everything. Like you know if a feature is being used or not, for example. And we've had a few cases. So currently we're basically re-architecting a service that was built years ago. And we're pretty much refueling the airplane in the air because we're not rewriting things from scratch. We're rewriting the service that's in production, and we're doing it little by little. We're replacing bits and pieces. And sometimes we look at a bit of code and we're always in doubt, like, this is so old. There's a comment here that says this is not being used. But is it being used? Nobody knows. So we put metrics around that. We put up observability there, and we're able to tell for sure whether that is being activated somewhere or not. And in a few cases, it wasn't. Like, we've seen stuff that hadn't been used in months. So we just went and deleted it. Technical stories. I could do a whole talk about not doing technical stories. So we don't do technical stories. Every technical story is done as part of a user story. It has to have user value. It has to have an impact on the users. It doesn't mean we don't refactor. We refactor all the time. We re-architect stuff all the time. But we don't decouple this from the user work or the user value. Because if you do, it could very well happen that you do all the technical work needed, and then it turns out that the customer is not interested anymore in the feature, or that the market has shifted, or that the requirements have changed, and all the work that you've done to prepare that, or even the priorities have changed. And all the work that you've done to prepare goes to waste because you're not going to leverage that cleanup that you've done. And yeah, pixel perfection, I mentioned again. Configuration is a black hole of sadness. People love to make their stuff configurable because who knows, it might grow, it might be amazing, and then you have a million possible permutations of config. Some of them that might not even make sense, a lot of them that are not used by anyone. And you have to maintain it all because sometimes you won't be able to remove that configuration once you've done. So doing your user research to understand, talking with the customers again, to understand what they actually need rather than, hey, let's build everything, let's build stuff and let user figure it out with configuration is not ideal. There's also, I mentioned gatekeeping here because there is over-processing of the processes themselves. Sometimes people fall into this trap of thinking that if you put gatekeeping, the processes become better. So if you have code reviews, for example, asynchronous code reviews, not code reviews that are done with pair programming, or a testing step that's manually tested, for example, that gives you more confidence. That might be over-processing of the processes themselves. So it's not necessarily necessary. We're getting to the end. Defects, not just bugs. It's anything. Bugs, even support requests that you get that aren't bugs. If you're confused by that would be a defect. I would consider it a defect. Building the wrong thing. So if you don't talk with customers, you build the wrong thing. And then they say, this is not what you needed. Do it again, please. Or they use it, but it doesn't kind of solve their problem, and you have to maintain the wrong feature because they're still kind of using it, even though it doesn't solve their needs fully. Data loss, any security issues, security vulnerabilities, these are all potential defects. The Toyota production system has a very is very low tolerance, even zero tolerance about defects. So I've mentioned the automation aspect of the TPS, and this contributes to having this zero tolerance approach to defects. If there is a problem, everything stops until the problem is addressed. Well, not everything, but some things will stop. And also, I mentioned at the beginning the respect for people, for example. One very interesting thing about the TPS is that anyone, doesn't matter if it's a manager or someone who just started working at the factory, anyone has the power to stop production if they find a defect. And this is something that we also try to encourage. Like, if you find a problem, it doesn't matter if who you are you a tester? It doesn't matter. If you found a problem, let it be known, and we'll decide whether we need to actually look into it. Well, when we address support requests, for example, we always try to identify the root causes of that gave rise to this support request, and we try to address it in a way that prevents further problems from occurring. When I joined the current team, they weren't doing this. They were looking at support requests. Some customer would complain. They say, this thing is not working correctly. My data is a little bit corrupted. The team would go, they would fix the data, but they would not try to understand why the data got corrupted in the first place. Because it took longer, because it was, they had to deal with code that nobody really fully understood because it was so old. And we had to change that because the team was completely swamped with support requests. They were coming in sometimes multiple times a day. And then we started to actually, it took longer, so they started to pile up, but it was worth it because now we have much fewer support requests coming in. And we looked at each one of them and said, okay, why did it corrupt the data in this way? And we fixed that. Sometimes there are multiple root causes, not a single one. So we always try to be as thorough as possible when we address these things. And the number of support requests, I can't remember how many, but we're getting a couple a week now. It used to be a couple of days, or at least one a day for sure. And yeah, prioritizing the fixes like the TPS recommends. Okay, finally, skills. This was added later on, so this is not part of the original TPS. Although the original TPS is, there is no original TPS because the auto production system is something that's continuously evolving. I mean, it's part of the philosophy of the TPS, the continuous improvement aspect of it. And it's so when Americans visited Japan in the 1950s and started to document the Toyota production system, they wrote books about it, and they started to do presentations and wrote papers about how the Japanese were working. But 6 months from that time, they were working in different ways already. They were changing how they worked, so things weren't quite static. And even though this wasn't originally a part of the TPS, it's now considered to be a kind of waste. So the waste of skills is the waste of the human potential and the human talent that's in the team, or even outside the team, but especially in the team that we focus. How does human skill get wasted? Anything that you have to do manually that could be done by a machine. Testing is a classic example. Deploying stuff. People left out is very, very common. It's like, oh, this is just for the managers, and they'll decide stuff and they'll tell others what to do. And we're missing out on a lot of ideas and a lot of ideation power that's in the team that's not being tapped because we're not involving everyone that works in that team. If there is a call with customers that only involves a manager or a designer, sometimes in some places didn't even involve a designer. It was just a manager And they would write up the requirements, and that was it. And people weren't able to, for one, understand the customer and getting feedback directly from the customer, but two, they weren't able to express their creative power and have ideas that could be completely different from the stuff that the manager would write up. And sometimes this thing is written up not as a problem but as a solution already. So if you start with describing a solution, no matter, even if you mean well, you are conditioning people already to not think of different solutions. So I can think of an example. From a company that I worked with some years ago, and the customer was telling us that they wanted this search results page, and they wanted to choose 50 items on the page, 100 items, 200 items, 500 items. And this was just given to us as, something to do, like implement this as you've been told. And we started thinking, this is a bit stupid. Why do they want to see 500 search results in a page? So it pushed back, and we finally got back to the customer, and we tried to understand. And it turns out that their current search engine was so crap that they had to show all the results and then use the browser search function to actually search for the test on the page. So they did not want 500 items in the search results. What they wanted was a better search engine that gave them more relevant results. So having people participate, having ideas, which might not even be valid, but having these ideas is very healthy. Bus factor is also an issue if you're locking people out, especially. I mean, if someone goes on vacation or gets sick, does production stop? And again, the knowledge transfer that I mentioned before, the pair programming aspect of it. So if you have someone who is primarily a front-end developer working side by side with someone who's primarily a back-end developer, and they're working together on the same thing, one might not be an expert, but at least they learn something. They'll learn something along the way, and they participate in writing that code. And if something happens in that code that they've written, and the expert is on vacation, they can still go there and fix something, improve something. The work doesn't have to stop because someone goes on vacation. So pair programming is really, really, really useful here as a knowledge transfer mechanism, as a more efficient code review mechanism, and also to prevent the bus factor with this. I mentioned already a bit, just following orders, having someone who's just happy to take orders from a manager and do whatever they're being told. They're not really being used to their full potential. And that's it. That's all I have. So if you can think of anything if you have questions, if you can think of anything that I haven't mentioned here, like I said, the list is potentially infinite. So yeah, let's hear your comments or your questions.
So you talked about nearly 48. Hai parlato circa di 48 punti, no? Realisticamente per te, per ritenere un'azienda, mi viene qua, me l'ero preparata in inglese la domanda, ma adesso la devo ritradurre tutta in italiano. Realisticamente, per ritenere un'azienda healthy, quindi un flusso di lavoro healthy, in che percentuale secondo te sono necessari appunto tutti questi punti? Cioè, perché comunque avere sotto controllo tutti questi 48 punti penso che sia irrealisticamente possibile. E quindi Appunto, la domanda è questa qua.
In
In
inglese.
che percentuale, secondo te?
Rispondo in inglese.
Ok.
Even one is a start. And you're right, it's unrealistic for someone, especially if you have a company that adopts none of these practices and has all of these kinds of waste. Adopting them all at the same time is unrealistic. Nobody's going to do it because it's too much change. It's just a lot of change. Either you bring in a team that's used to work like this. And when I was a consultant, that's how I used to work. So we had teams of people who were used to this kind of agile practices and minimizing waste. And they would go into a customer, they would take part of a project or a product, and they would set the example. And hopefully, through that example, they would begin to evangelize certain practices. But for a team that isn't used to this, it has to be little by little. What steps, it depends, or what practices is going to depend on the dysfunctions or the problems that you see on the teams. So it's a very case-by-case analysis and resolution of the problems. You need to spend some time with the teams, understand, okay, where are they lacking, where are they generating waste, and what can you do, or what can you incentivize them to do? So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to this, unfortunately.
E in realtà una domanda ulteriore: e quante persone attualmente lavorano appunto affinché vengano rimossi quanti più waste possibili ad oggi nel tuo caso? Perché parlando per me tutto questo è molto affine a quello che faccio io, perché noi siamo in un team di developer experience che più o meno è declinazione delle stesse cose, e siamo 10, e anche realisticamente parlando riuscire a coprire tutto quello lo vedo una cosa molto, molto lontana. E voi invece quanti siete che lavorate attivamente su questo?
In the team?
Sì, il team di staff engineering.
So in the team we're 8, counting with everyone, really, managers, designers, we're 8. And the levels of experience are very varied. So we have people on the team who've been there for years. We have people on the team who have just joined. I joined the team some 6 months ago. We have two other people who are highly experienced and are able to drive this kind of change inside the team. So there needs to be some critical mass. You need some people who know what they're doing and why they're doing it, to not force but encourage certain practices. We have someone who's just joined the company even, and it's great because it's very easy to work with junior developers more than intermediates or seniors, because they're able to absorb stuff. They don't question so much. Intermediates, I think, no, seniors are the worst, actually. Seniors are the worst because they have these ideas that they're set in their heads, and they're like, I've worked like this for 16 years. I'm not going to change now. I've heard this literal words from someone. So convincing them is difficult. So you need some critical mass in the team. It doesn't necessarily have to be everyone, but little by little things change. And when they see results, because they have to see results, otherwise they won't be convinced, then they start to think, okay, we're doing the right thing. This is how it's done. So for my current team, since we've joined, people are afraid to touch the code base. I mean, it's legacy. It's very high. It's very highly exposed. Any problem can easily become a big problem for the customers with, red alarm kind of thing. So we've started working on test automation, automating deployments, pair programming, and so on. And now people are actually refactoring stuff, like even changing whole parts of the code base not in one go, but little by little. But they're making major changes to the code base after this. But it takes time. And same thing with the support requests. When we joined, they were swamped with support requests. but it's a process. It takes a lot of patience, which I guess I like to do this kind of work. Actually, it's like programming, but with people.
Allora, intanto grazie per il talk e complimenti.
Grazie.
Ti volevo chiedere, in virtù di tutti questi punti che ci hai mostrato, avete trovato un sistema di metrica per cui monitorate quanto questi sono effettivi poi sono effettivi nei team? Cioè, nel senso, lo monitorate nel tempo? Che sistema avete trovato?
So generally we use metrics.
Okay.
So certain stuff impacts. So what directly impacts metrics? So for example, all the practices around defects, for example, they've directly contributed to the mean time to recovery and the number of issues that came up. That really helped. Having observability as well. So people were still very much in the. It helps the time to recovery. For example, I can think of when we introduced metrics, people were still very used to looking at logs. And we had this incident some time ago, and not a major incident, but still people were trying to find, the errors in the logs, trying to understand what it was. And I directed them to the metrics that we were starting to put in place, actual system and business metrics. And fortunately, we had something already in place for this. And I pointed, look, this other service that our service depends on is timing out. You can see it here. That is the problem. And then we went to talk with the other team that was responsible for the issue. And so something that they had been doing for 10, 15 minutes, looking at logs, we could identify in 5 seconds, looking at the dashboards for the metrics. This helped, this helps reduce consistently. If applied consistently, it helps reduce the time to recover. Pair programming and not having to wait for code reviews, like the time to deploy something, it also goes down. We can make many more changes every day. So the number of deployments every day can be whatever we want, actually. We don't even count them anymore. It's definitely more than once a day that we deploy something. And again, I remind you that people are afraid to touch the code base 6 months ago. People are even building a separate service from scratch on the side just so they didn't have to deal with. By the way, that died when I joined. So no building stuff from scratch. Because it's a big bang release. Like you don't have feedback on it until it's actually finished. Are you building the right thing? Is it even needed? So rather than build stuff on the side, we were improving stuff in place. It's not as nice. I mean, the code base is still ugly, and we're still having to re-architect a lot of stuff, but it's safer and we get immediate feedback if we're doing the right thing or not. I don't know if that answered your question.
Grazie. Ciao, ti volevo chiedere, io molti dei punti e delle soluzioni che hai proposto li vedo perfette per un'azienda di prodotto, perché credo che alcuni di questi involvano, insomma, abbiano anche dei rischi, nel senso, ad esempio, saltare l'ambiente di produzione, l'ambiente di staging e andare direttamente in produzione. Sicuramente qualcuno deve prendersi dei rischi. Se il prodotto è il mio, posso prendermi questo rischio, posso dire ho un down di 10 minuti, ma in 10 minuti risolvo il problema. Ma se invece in un contesto come quello di un'azienda di consulenza, in cui il cliente è un'altra azienda, un'altra software company, pensi sia applicabile? Tutti questi punti pensi siano applicabili?
Yeah, I used to be a consultant too, and this is what we try to evangelize or incentivize in the companies, in the clients that we work with. And it's like I said, we brought in a team that was more or less an expert in doing this, and would be able to demonstrate these practices and how they work. So there is a perceived risk, not necessarily a real risk. It depends on how, because these things are self-reinforcing. Like, you don't just remove the staging environment and say, hey, great, we don't have a staging environment, we're not
Quello
wasting
era
anything.
probabilmente la parte più estrema che hai detto, però molte altre cose sono, ad esempio, non fare il pull request, no? In un contesto come quello di un'azienda di consulenza, dove magari la pull request deve essere approvata, no? Dall'azienda cliente, devo farla
Yeah,
per
but we have
forza.
to think about what that means. Like, what does it mean for a pull request to be approved? First of all, does it actually prove that anyone looked at it? I
No,
used to
beh,
work in
quello
a
è chiaro, no?
place where people would open a pull request and then they would go on Slack and say, can someone approve, please? And 5 seconds later, it was approved. Like,
Come
sometimes
convinci il
hundreds of
cliente
lines of code
che questo
changed.
funziona?
Nobody was actually looking at those pull requests. Like, so you have a ritual, doesn't mean that you have, you know, the security or the safety to do things. So yeah, but and like I was saying, these things come up little by little. So we don't make all of these changes in one go, unless obviously your team is already prepared to work like this. Because a lot of this confidence and a lot of this trust needs to be earned. So little by little, you start maybe with tests, for example, and you have automated tests, and then you get to a point where your deployment pipelines are always green, and you think, okay, the tests are pretty good. I'm confident. I'm always pressing the deploy to production button, whatever, all the time. I don't even check anymore. Let's make it automated. And it just goes to production from the push. And then you start to think, I'm pair programming. I'm working with someone who's actually actively, not pretending to look at the code, who's actively pairing on the code with me. And we're talking about it and we're discussing, is there a bug in here? Is this the best architecture that we can have? And that's the code review too. It's just not there's no ritual around it. There's no page on GitHub to prove this. But it's two people, and there's a code review that's implicit in here.
Non so se c'era qualcun altro dopo, l'ultima domanda.
Yeah.
Ok. Quando parli di peer programming, che strumenti utilizzate per farlo?
Because we work remotely, we share our
Screen
screens.
sharing? Ok.
Screen sharing.
Quindi solamente screen sharing o le funzioni del lead, ad esempio, per seguire l'altra persona, oppure semplicemente screen sharing?
Simply screen sharing. We use Tuple for this, so we are even able to take over someone else's screen if necessary. If you're trying to explain something, I mean, we ask for permission, but if you're trying to explain something they're not quite getting in, it's like, can I type this myself? And you can do it that too. And there's chat built in, so even video now, so it's like we're working together side by side, except that we're remote. It's pretty great.
Luis, grazie mille davvero anche da parte mia,
Prego.
bellissimo, davvero fantastico talk.
Grazie.
E io volevo un po', più che una domanda, chiedere un po' un tuo pensiero su un punto che mi ha colpito, sul quale anche tempo addietro ci ho riflettuto e mi sono fatto un'idea e volevo conoscere anche la tua. Il punto in questione era quello del buy, cioè del buy, don't reinvent the wheel.
Ah, sì.
Ok? Cioè di smettere di scrivere, farsi le cose in casa, ma di comprare. Sono abbastanza vecchietto, quindi vengo da un retaggio del cui ci facciamo tutto in casa, perché ovviamente non c'era quello da comprare, no? Poi comincia a nascere le start-up, comincia a nascere qualche piattaforma per velocizzare la startup comincia a comprare, poi scala e comincia non più a comprare, ma a farsene le cose, perché aumenta la size. Invece ultimamente noto invece questo trend completamente, perdonami, c'è un altro passaggio del build or buy, quindi si arriva a una fase in cui si ha una scelta, me lo faccio o me lo compro. Invece da un paio di anni c'è questo trend del se c'è compra, e la riflessione che volevo fare, chiederti, era ho notato tutto questo un po' questo nuovo mindset diciamo sul prodotto, su tanti SaaS, e quindi grandissima offerta, e anche il fatto della logica di concentriamoci davvero sul nostro prodotto, e quindi i buoni presupposti da te descritti che escono fuori da diversi anni, che sposo. E quindi volevo chiedere se anche tu eri d'accordo con tutto questo, se anche qualcosa, perché ovviamente l'idea c'era già da diversi anni, però è cominciata ad affermarsi perché davvero ormai si trova una piattaforma per la qualunque. E quindi volevo capire se era il mercato che si è mosso a creare tutte queste piattaforme perché c'era questa idea, oppure è nata questa idea perché ci sta tutta questa offerta ora. Era un po' questa il pensiero che volevo condividere con te e capire quale idea ti eri fatto anche tu.
Not sure I
Grazie.
understood 100%, but so about the buy versus build debate, it obviously depends, because you're probably not going to do npm install is odd to figure out if a number is even or odd. That kind of thing. Like sometimes just build it, right? It depends on the costs of what you're trying to build or trying to buy. So you always have to do this cost analysis. If it's worth building because you can build something that's much simpler, that's tailored to your specific needs, then build. But we've had, I've worked in places where people were building their own queues. Do you need to build your own queues? Just install RabbitMQ, just use SQS, something, right? So it can very easily go to extremes where you buy everything, you build nothing, and then you end up with a huge cost at the end that you have to pay some third-party companies for their platform, for their SaaS products. Or the other extreme where you build everything from scratch and everything is so brittle and so specific that you need, experts on those specific bits of infrastructure to get anything done. So yeah, sometimes somewhere in the middle is. As for what you were asking, I'm not sure I quite got the what you meant with having the idea or the product from the platform. Not quite sure.
Yeah, sì, se veniva un po' dalla mentalità del platform engineering e di creare questa visione di prodotto interno molto forte, ma al tempo stesso se c'è la possibilità di accedere a qualcosa che già disponibile, si va dritti su quella direzione e utilizzare quell'approccio per parlare con quella direzione.
I guess it depends on the business that you're trying to have. It depends on the money that you have to waste. I mean, some companies could even be building their own frameworks, so they could export those frameworks or those internal software products as their own products, so as a marketing strategy, like Facebook and React. That's an example. Like,
sì, chiaro.
Did Facebook need to build React? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but they took it and they productized it in a way, and they exported. But it depends on money you want to waste or spend or invest on these things, and whether it's appropriate for the thing that you're trying to build. I guess it depends a lot on.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Vabbè, una domanda la troviamo. No, in realtà avevo due considerazioni, una positiva e una negativa. E quella positiva è che la presentazione mi è piaciuta moltissimo, cioè mi è piaciuta molto la mappatura cioè hai fatto secondo me un'analisi molto approfondita dei vari punti in cui può fallire o comunque ci può essere un waste, come si dice, uno spreco nel software. E non so se tu hai dei progetti su questa presentazione. Penso che puoi crearci, cioè puoi evolverla e crearci qualcosa diciamo più completo, insomma, non so se se sto spoilerando mi sono perso qualche
Should I
pezzo.
read the book? I don't think so.
No, ask Alessandro for that, però
I'll ask him.
maybe
Alessandro.
maybe it's still your idea, but
Oh, please do. I mean, I don't own any of these ideas, so any
no, però
publicity, any,
lo so, però secondo me il lavoro di mappare le cose, dargli un nome è molto importante, e anche la maniera in cui l'hai graficato poi è, sì, cioè è discutibile, alcune cose moving, alcune cose transport, quello possiamo discutere.
one of the reasons I did this is because I was watching this talk some time ago, last year, where the speaker was presenting lean versus agile.
Okay.
They were like saying, this is what lean does, is agile. And he was talking about this, like these things were incompatible. I'm just like, I don't agree with any of this. So what I did this talking about, centered on waste, but then trying to map, the agile things or the agile practices that we do, like extreme programming, the Kanban, all of that stuff, as a way to address our, and this is based on experience, which to me it was easy to come up with this list because I didn't have to research anything. It's all from the teams that I'm working with. So it was very easy to map these things because it's what we actually do day to day to address these kinds of waste. And maybe there are better ways, but yeah, we're always open to.
Non lo so se è facile come dici, cioè nel senso secondo me hai fatto un ottimo lavoro, e già il fatto di vederlo secondo me ha grande valore. E la parte che dicevo negativa in realtà è, secondo me manca una cosa che forse secondo me non l'hai scritta ma l'hai pensata, quindi te lo chiedo. Quello che manca secondo me è l'ego delle persone, che cioè mancano, tante volte si fanno dei waste, si dice scarti, perché alcune persone magari gli piace una feature più che, e quindi ignorano i dati, oppure alcune aziende soffrono di overmanaging quando vogliono crescere più di quello che possono, e quindi poi ci sono molti più livelli.
Yes.
Poi non so, mi vengono a mente tante cose, e queste cose non so, cioè io
You're right. That's good. That's definitely a source of waste. Especially, you have a lot of, and there's this thing in our industry where when companies want to signal growth, they hire.
Yeah.
They hire and hire. They hire people they don't need just to show that they're growing. They're wasting a lot of money. And then these people are sitting around not knowing what to do. And they start to make crap up. Like they start to add features nobody needs because they have to keep busy. They have to show something for
richiedono anche più persone hai, più manager, e quindi più meeting, e più sal.
It's like the waste too is self-reinforcing. Like
No, nessuna azienda pubblica è stata nominata.
Yeah. And the wastes are self-reinforcing. So for example, if you overproduce, you are creating more inventory because either you need more raw material or you need to sell more to get rid of the things that you produce. So it's the wastes pile up.
Comunque, se scrivi un libro e me lo regali, ti giuro che lo leggo.
Chieda Alessandro.
Faccio velocissima. Un esempio in cui una qualche industry, un qualche prodotto in cui parte o totalmente questo modello non si applica, in cui vi faccio una domanda: questo modello, questi suggerimenti in parte o in tutto sono sempre applicabili per qualsiasi prodotto, qualsiasi industry? È la domanda a trabocchetto.
I don't know. But maybe I wouldn't. I don't. It's not an industry I work in, so I've never thought about it. This is applicable to the stuff that I've experienced with. So if there's something that's different from what I expect, either I will have to learn, or maybe there's a different way of applying these things. But to be honest, I don't know.
Chiaro. Ok, Farei un bel applauso per Luís e la sua ottima presentazione. Ringraziamo chiaramente ancora Sourcesense per averci ospitato oggi, grazie. E soprattutto per il rinfresco dopo. Non so se avete buttato un occhio, c'è un rinfresco dopo. Grazie ancora Sourcesense. E ringraziamo per chi ci ha seguito nella diretta e vi saluto. Alla prossima.
Grazie a tutti.